All right, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about 5 Lightroom tips to improve your editing process, make it more efficient for people who are new to this software. These tips are going to be geared more towards beginners. Hopefully by watching this video, you'll learn something and make your photos better. So let's get started. All right, so before I start this video, I will just want to preface by saying that this photo is taken in RAW, so I will have quite a lot of leeway with the colors and the lighting. There's a lot more data than if you were to shoot in something like JPEG. So if you're not doing that, that's kind of like my first bonus tip. I suggest you shoot in RAW because it makes a big difference. All right, so the first tip today is going to be using the cropping tool before you actually start editing. So a lot of people will keep their photo as shot and they'll do all their edits, and then right before they export, they'll crop it down to how they want. I suggest you actually do the opposite. I would suggest you crop your photo first. So if I was to go for Instagram landscape, it would be an 8x10 photo. I would crop it first and then start editing, because when you edit a photo that's not cropped and then you crop it, it's harder to see the details because your subject will be smaller because you're editing a photo that's really large. And also you might be focusing on aspects that won't actually even be in the frame. And it's just it's harder to focus on exactly what you're looking at. So if you crop first and then you start editing, you know exactly what the photo is going to look like, where the borders are, if there's something distracting, if certain colors look better, whatever it is. But I would suggest you crop first and then start editing. And it's not permanent. You can always go back and, adjust it as you go along. If you want it a little bit more, on one side of the frame or in the middle or a little closer in, whatever you want, you can adjust it after. But I would suggest you at least do a preliminary crop first. And also something really important is take this little ruler tool here, or you can do it manually, but the ruler is pretty accurate, and adjust your horizon. So one thing you're really going to want to do is make sure it's straight. This is really important, especially when you're using landscape photos and there's like a horizon like over the water or something. If it's crooked, it looks really bad. So make sure it's straight. It's going to make it look a lot more professional and a lot more straight. So tip number 2 today is going to be using radial masks. So radial masks are a really strong tool that allow you to do different things. Primarily, like what I like to do with it is draw focus on a subject. So if you're up on your main toolbar here and you go to masks and then down here to the circle, radial masks, this is a mask that's like a circle. So everything that's in red will be adjusted by your edits that you make. So if you really want to brighten up a subject, you can put it over here. For example, you can up the exposure on it a little bit. You can kind of play with like the whites or the blacks, however you want to edit it to make your subject pop. I tend to like to kind of do something like this. And it makes a pretty big difference. That's if you want to brighten up a subject. Another tip that this is the way I prefer to use a radial mask, is if you go into the top over here. So I'm just going to reset the mask and go to the invert tab here. So you click invert, and now everything in red, keep in mind, is what's being affected. So it's everything besides the fox now is going to be darkened or lightened or whatever you mess with it. So I like to kind of keep everything else a little darker. So if you darken this a little bit, ever so slightly with like the exposure, and maybe darken it with the blacks a bit, it really pulls the eye and pulls the focus to the subject. So you'll see what I mean if I turn off the mask here. This is what it looks like now with the mask. If you just turn off this mask, see how everything gets brightened. It's almost like a vignette effect, but it's kind of doing it manually. But it does make a difference, and it draws a lot of focus onto your subject. Another thing you can do with these masks is if you zoom into the eyes. This is really useful when you're working with wildlife or doing portraits or something, working with anything really with eyes, is you can take these masks and you can brighten up the eyes a little bit just to make them pop. So I like to lift the exposure actually just a tiny little bit, just to give them that tiny little bit of pop to them, and maybe just raise the whites ever so slightly. And if you go overboard with this, they're gonna kind of look like a ghost or a demon, so be careful with this one. But if you just do it a little bit, it really makes a big difference. You can also duplicate it. So now there's 2 of these, and then you can rotate this and do the same thing to the other eye. And if you look back, it does make a big difference when just kind of making the eyes pop. So that's another little useful tool you can use with the Radial Mask. All right, tip number 3 today is going to be using the HSL sliders, or the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. Basically, if you scroll down from your main area down here, you have either the HSL tab or the color tab. HSL will sort by hue for all the colors, saturation for all the colors, and luminance for all the colors. I prefer going straight to color. So what this does is it allows you to affect each color differently from the photo. So you can take, for example, if you want to affect the green, right now the green, because I shot this in spring, the grass was kind of dead. The green in the photo is a little kind of just yellowy, and it doesn't look that good. So if you really want to make it pop, you can affect just the green. So if you click green here, if you affect the hue, what it will do is it'll change kind of the tone of the color. So it'll bring, if you bring it to the left, it'll make it look like the yellow here. So if you bring it all the way left, you'll see what I mean. All the greens in the photo will look kind of more yellow. If you bring it all the way to the right, it'll look more blue. So they're all kind of like that, I don't know, teal color. Saturation will really just, affect the saturation of the green. So if you drop it, everything's kind of gray and monotone. If you bring it to the max, it's like a really, really saturated green. And luminance, what it'll do is kind of affect the brightness. So if you lower it all the way, it'll be dark greens. You bring it all the way up, it'll be kind of like a nice light green. So what I like to do in this photo, for example, I want it to be kind of a lush green, make it look very, alive and kind of luscious. So I would maybe bring it, just adjust the hue ever so slightly, bring up the saturation, bring up the luminance a bit. There's also a lot of yellow in this photo, so you could take some of the yellows, and if you drag them all the way, all the yellows are going to go towards the green now. So it's always the little color that's on the right and left side of the little circle up here. So I would make them kind of look green, maybe adjust the saturation a little bit. See, so now kind of the before and after, it's pretty significant. And one thing too, if you're not sure what color, if you're trying to affect one area but you're not sure what color it is, if you go to HSL here and you click this little target, so this is going to affect the hue, what you can do is just click on a certain area. So let's just say you really want to affect this background green here. You click and hold and you scroll up and down on your mouse or your keypad, and you'll notice all of them will kind of go up. See, so now it's the green and yellow that are going up quite a lot. So you know that those are the two colors that are going to be affected. So you can do that, okay, it's green and yellow, and then just undo your action. And then now you can go back to color, go to your greens and your yellows, and you know if you want to affect that area, those are the colors that you're going to have to touch. But this can be really powerful just on making like sunsets pop. You can really make the orange pop, or if you want to make the sky a little darker blue, lighter blue, whatever you want. This really just gives you control of all the colors in the photo to give it that kind of feel that you want. All right, so tip number 4 today is going to be using subject masks. So if you click mask here, go new mask and click select subject, Lightroom's AI will automatically detect the subject in your photo, and then you can adjust something specifically on the mask, or actually if you press invert, you can do everything but the mask. In this case, it's actually done pretty well. It doesn't do it perfect all the time. If that's the case, you can press minus here and then go subtract from mask with, or just say brush. So just say you didn't want this back end, you could just kind of get rid of that if it wasn't in it. In this case, the mask was actually really well done by the AI. So now if you have this mask here, you can up the exposure, drop the exposure, depending on what you want to do. You can really just affect just that. So you can, make it blue if you want, make it yellow, whatever you want to do with it. You can affect just the subject, which is really powerful. And again, if you use the invert tool, you can affect everything but that. So darken the outsides, if you go to the invert tool and then make everything around it kind of yellow, so you want to mimic a sunset but keep the fox in this case like really white, you can do that. So you can do a lot of different things with that, and the AI is pretty good and it'll detect it quite rapidly and normally pretty accurately. All right, so the 5th and final tip today is going to be using the heal or the cloning buttons. So this is really good to just kind of eliminate little distractions in your photos that you don't want people to see, or you just want to kind of that are pulling the eye in a certain way. So if you press heal, there's heal and clone. Heal will essentially heal it, so it'll take from another part of the photo and kind of what AI thinks should be there through Lightroom will kind of be there. So if I take this little fluff, for example, and heal it, it's gonna take from where this arrow is drawing. So it's taking data from here and trying to make it look realistic and put it there. If you were to do clone, it's gonna actually take a legitimate like copy of it. So it'll clone, for example, if I'm taking here, it'll clone from wherever the arrow goes and actually put an exact copy there. So as you can see, through these two, if I was just to remove the borders, it's literally an exact clone. It's kind of hard to see, but it gets pretty obvious. But this is a good little tool to use if you wanted to just kind of go around and clean up little things like the fluffs or little pieces of grass or little specks in the photo. See, it doesn't always work because now it's trying to take from the fox, but you can click it and drag that and move it somewhere else to where you'd want it to take the data from to heal it. This is good for little things. If you're gonna remove like an entire person or an entire section of a photo, I would suggest using Photoshop for that. I will make a video on that eventually, but for the tiny little distractions, the heal tool is actually pretty decent at just doing the kind of small things that you wouldn't notice. But you can just kind of go around and click and move the little distractions, move the things you don't want in the photo, and kind of clean it up a little to your liking. All right, so that concludes today's video. These were 5 Lightroom tips for beginners. There's so many different tips I'd like to give on this software. I will be making a part 2, probably 3 of this video eventually, just to go over and cover everything I want to cover. There's a lot of keyboard shortcuts you can use, things like that. It's a really powerful tool, and it can make your photos significantly better. Before we leave, I'm gonna give you one last bonus tip. Is if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, pretty much, you'll notice a little tab that says lens corrections. So if you press enable profile corrections, that will take the lens you used and kind of correct it, I guess, and like undistort it. So this one I used a zoom lens. It's probably not going to make that much of a difference. Typically with like a wide angle lens, it'll really take the bubbling around the edges and make it look a little better. But I suggest you always just enable that for all your photos. So you can see I use the Canon 70-200, and it knows what lens I use, and it'll fix the edges and make it just look a little bit more natural and less warped. So that's just kind of a little side tip that I suggest you do on every photo, either at the end or at the beginning. I mean, it doesn't really matter all that much. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be making more of these. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys soon. Cheers.